What is up, ladies and gentle nerds? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today we are looking at yet another random magic card like we like to do here on the Overthinking MTG podcast. And today we are looking at a special one. It is Anguished Unmaking. It is an instant for one, a white and a black, that says exile target non-land permanent. You lose 3 life. And this shows, the one that we're looking at right here is actually from Shadows over Innistrad, and it shows the depiction is of Sorin. So the artwork shows Sorin looking away as Avacyn, the Angel of Hope, is clearly being unmade behind him. And the flavor text is, Sorin had created Avacyn, so it was a cruelty beyond imagining, a pain beyond description that it fell upon him to end her forever. This card is tear-jerking even if you don't know the story. Now, one of the things about and to be fair, I don't know much about the story, but I do understand that Avacyn was Avacyn basically went heel. She went bad at one point and became a villain that needed to be taken down, apparently. And Sorin was the person who had to do that, and that was clearly problematic for him. Now, the card itself is fantastic in a number of ways. One, just narratively speaking, flavorfully, this card is just beautiful. All the pieces are there. Now, it is heart-wrenching in that it is not a feel-good moment, but it is very powerful, and one of the joys of narrative storytelling and one of the powers that fiction brings is in the ability to conjure emotions, and this definitely does that. Now, the card itself, mechanically speaking, exile target non-land permanent for 3 mana. That's fantastic. You can target absolutely anything with this. It's really cool. Now, you do lose 3 life, so you are paying not only mana, but you're also paying with your own life total, which is a very black mechanic, and I like it. I feel like it fits nicely. So you are only paying 3 mana for an utter end, effectively, but it costs 3 life in place of the 4th mana. Utter end being a card that's very similar that says exile target non-land permanent, and it costs 4. And it's also in white-black. And so we see this is actually kind of a cool little piece of the color pie in that white exiles things, because one of the reasons that white exiles permanents rather than just destroying them most of the time is because black wants to reanimate. And so white, being the foil for that, exiles them, gets them out of the game completely so they're not going back to the graveyard. So that's kind of the way that white kind of hoses black in that regard. And, and we all know there are a number of different reasons why you'd want to exile now, with things like flashback, escape, etc., etc. So it's just, yeah, this card, white exiles, black pays life rather than mana for certain effects. If you look at cards like Vampiric Tutor, for example, that allows you to search up a card, put it on top, but you lose, I believe it's 2 life in that case. And actually, the whole Phyrexian mana concept ultimately came out of this idea of paying life instead of mana for different effects. Now, when it's done at scale, like Phyrexian mana, it's a little bit problematic. But when it's isolated in situations like Anguished Unmaking, I feel like it makes a lot of sense, because you are taking the hit to your life total, which theoretically will make you easier to kill, but you're also removing whatever threat is pressing in the moment. And so it's usually worth that. The truth is, as the arena loading screens like to tell us, your life total is a resource, and so you shouldn't be afraid to spend it. And that comes in a couple of different ways. In the case of Anguish Unmaking, you're spending your life in order to cast this spell, but fortunately, it's actually not an alternative casting cost. This happens upon resolution. Therefore, if this spell gets countered, you don't lose that life. Now, if it read as an additional cost to cast this spell, pay 3 life, then that'd be a completely different story, because you would pay that mana before the spell resolves. And so as a result, you would pay the life, spend the mana, and then if it gets countered, you don't get the effect you want, but you still lost the life. With Anguish Unmaking, if the spell gets countered, you don't lose that life. So you're not actually spending it in the most technical sense. However, you're losing the life in order to cast this spell. All in all, I feel like it's worth it. Actually, we see that with black as well with card draw, because when blue draws cards, they just draw cards. They may have to discard a card depending on how cheap the the effect is. But with black, if you draw cards, you lose life. That's just the nature of the beast. Because with black, everything is all about ambition and power. And when ambition and power is your goal, you will want to achieve it at all costs. And so here, the destruction of your enemies comes with a pretty considerable hit to your life total. I mean, 3 life isn't the end of the world, but it's a factor, especially if you're in a one-on-one kind of situation. If you're starting with 20 life, 3 is a pretty big hit. If you're in Commander, Anguished Unmaking is a phenomenal piece of removal because 3 life is not that big of a deal. And losing 3 life, you don't think much of it in that situation. And the flexibility to target absolutely anything cannot be understated. The truth is, when you have a spell like this spell is sneakily modal. You can get rid of creatures with it, you can get rid of enchantments with it, you can get rid of artifacts with it. The only thing you can't touch is lands. And so as a result, and you can get rid of planeswalkers. You can completely blast any planeswalker you want with no restriction for 3. That's pretty great. That's actually phenomenal. So this card is great on a number of axes. Like, no matter how you look at it, Anguished Unmaking is a phenomenal card. If you are running an EDH deck right now that includes white and black, regardless of the combination, you should at least consider putting Anguished Unmaking in there, because as far as targeted removal goes, it's tough to get better than this. Especially if you're in like a life gain strategy where you're going to have plenty of life to spend it. Absolutely. Spend that life instead of mana, because you're going to be able to hit this more easily and faster. So if you have one opponent who's really running away with the game as early as turn 3, you can really cut them off at the knees and hit a key piece of their engine right away, like right out of the gate. Whereas even if you have something like an Utter End, you would still have to wait one more turn. Whereas with Anguished Unmaking, you don't. That is one of the key benefits of spending your life instead of mana, is speed. Being able to make it happen faster is huge. Anguished Unmaking allows you to destroy absolutely anything on the board that is a thorn in your side on turn 3. That is truly fantastic. All right, everybody, thank you so much for hanging out. This has been an absolute pleasure. This has been a quick one, but the truth of the matter is, this card is beautiful, it is efficient, it's wonderful on every single axis. So I kind of... Axis? Every axis. All of the axes. Yeah, it's fantastic. Check it out. If you don't have one of these, I highly recommend you get your hands on one if you're running a Commander deck in these colors. Anyway, and also, just a little bit behind the curtain, I'm looking at the clock and I'm realizing we've been talking for about 7 minutes. Normally, I try to make these around 10 minutes, but I took a listen back to my last episode and I realized I was awfully redundant, and I was also redundant. And so, I'm going to be a little easier on myself rather than trying to stretch and repeat myself. If an episode ends up being shorter, well, as long as I got out everything I needed to say, that is what it is. So thank you so much for understanding. Thank you so much for hanging in there, everybody. I appreciate you. And you can catch me on Twitch, twitch.tv/hamhawks42. And don't forget, you are a good person, and you deserve to be happy.